It's great to be with you today. My name is Afshin Molavi. I am from Johns Hopkins University, the School of Advanced International Studies. It's always great to be in Dubai. This is a city that I've been visiting for almost 25 years now and have been writing about for almost 2 decades. I have someone very important in the audience, Ustaz Khalid Al-Maina, who gave me my very first job in journalism. I hope he doesn't fire me after this presentation, but it's great to be with you today. You know, what I'm going to be talking about is a big question. Where are we going? And it's the kind of question that I hope we can all ask ourselves as journalists. I am today working with a think tank, but I call myself a recovering journalist. I still work regularly in the journalism trade. And it's a big question, and one thing we can say is wherever we're going there fast. We're living in a world where 2 million pieces of content is put onto Facebook every minute of every day. 250 hours of YouTube, of video is uploaded onto YouTube every minute of every day. Now, consider this. It took the telephone 75 years to get 50 million users. You know Angry Birds? Remember Angry Birds? Angry Birds, it took them 35 days to get 50 million users. So wherever we're going there fast. And there is a new ism in the world. I call it connectism. We all want to be connected. We're living in a world of 3 billion smartphones. So we've gone from 0 smartphones in 2007 to 3 billion smartphones today. Everyone wants to be connected. Certainly there are issues of, you know, addiction to social media, addiction to our phones, but everybody wants to be connected no matter where you are. So let's start with this young boy here. Today is April 3rd, 2018. On this day, 353,424 children will be born, right? How do I know that? I don't know the exact number, but one thing we do know is that every year there's 129 million children born. And in fact, in the 20 minutes that we will spend together, there will be about 4,900 children born. And where are they being born? They're being born in what I call the 85%. My colleagues and I have launched a lab called the Emerge 85 Lab. And what is that 85 number based on? 85% of the world lives outside of Northern America and Europe. 85% of the world lives in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. The West is not just a demographic minority, it is a demographic minority by far, by a long shot. So 85% of the world. This is the world population. Africa is growing 500 million extra by the year 2030. Asia, an extra 600 million. Meanwhile, Northern America is growing only modestly, and Europe is shrinking. This is the world population we are dealing with. Now, we all know Moore's Law, right? Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, who once said that computing power roughly doubles every 2 years, right? And it is, you know, in many ways, it is the reason why we have this technological explosion, because Gordon Moore was absolutely right about that, and when he said that in the mid-1960s. But how many of you know Mike Tyson's law, right? Mike Tyson, of course, being the great American boxer and philosopher, who once said, everyone has a plan, that is, until you get punched in the face, right? Because the punches will come. And if anybody can handle punches, it's this crowd. The media crowd knows how to handle punches, but the punches will come in many ways. There's rapid geopolitical change. If I stood here 3 years ago and I told you that the American television reality star and real estate mogul Donald Trump would be president of the United States, you would laugh at me, right? If I stood here 3 years ago and I told you that the United Kingdom is going to be exiting from its most important trade relationship, the European Union, you would have laughed at me further. If I told you there would be a prince whose name you may not have even known in Saudi Arabia, who would be now the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, leading a transformation of the kingdom, you would laugh at me and say, get this guy off the stage. He's making too many radical predictions. But that's precisely what has happened. Technological change. Uber, you know you've arrived as a company when you have become a verb, right? Uber is constantly, changing the way we commute. So there's the social storms. Now, if Facebook were a country, it would be the largest country in the world, right? We can call it Facebookistan, right? 2 billion people in Facebookistan. Markets go up, markets go down. All of these are the punches that are going to be coming. So what I'm going to try to do here is just go very briefly through what some of the top media narratives are today, but then take you to what I think we should be focusing more attention on as columnists and journalists and editors. So some of the top media narratives, of course, Donald Trump, right? No matter what you're writing about, a friend of mine who works in as a science journalist told me that, I'm writing about fish and oceans, but if I somehow figure out a way to get Donald Trump in the story, the editors are interested in it, right? Donald Trump certainly at the very top of the media narratives. The U.S. television media, in my view, has gone overboard. U.S. television media has forgotten that there's a world out there beyond Donald Trump's Twitter feed, right? I mean, these are the kind of things we see on U.S. television media. The president gets 2 scoops of ice cream, everyone else gets 1. That's a real headline on CNN. CNN Domestic. Now, CNN International does a better job, but on that day, hundreds of Syrian children were probably being killed, and this is what we get. The president gets 2 scoops of ice cream, everyone else gets 1. U.S. television media, that's probably the subject of another seminar, how U.S. television media has covered President Donald Trump. This is the divided states of America, an electoral map of the United States, red and blue. Again, a top media narrative. European elections with the rise of populist nationalists, again, a top media narrative. I'm going through these quickly because I want to get to the heart of what I think should be a much bigger media narrative. The rise and rise of Xi Jinping in China. Of course, anything Xi Jinping does, China being the 2nd largest economy in the world now, he has consolidated power. He looks like he's going to be president for life. Vladimir Putin and Putinism, of course, is a top media narrative. He's exerting influence all across Europe, exerting influence in the Middle East. North Korea, of course, will remain a top media narrative, certainly with the President Trump's visit with and summit with Kim Jong-un. MBS and Vision 2030, certainly it's been a top media narrative in the United States, where I live and I've just come from, where MBS has really been all over the news. The Syrian civil war, I wish this was more of a top media narrative, certainly in the U.S. media, but it seems like the president's 2 scoops of ice cream seems to trump it sometimes. The Syria refugee crisis remains a top media narrative. Daesh remains a top media narrative. How do you like your Brexit certainly is going to remain a top media narrative. As is the Venezuela story, which is the biggest story coming out of Latin America right now. Venezuela experiencing massive hyperinflation and crisis, and how long can Nicolas Maduro hang on? So those are the top media narratives, and those are the narratives that you all know about. So what I'm going to try to do in the next 10 minutes or so is give you a sense of what I call these 5 disruption-proof trends that I think we should be spending more time looking at. I previewed a few of them. These are all headlines, 85%, they're all numbers, and I'll go through what I mean by each of them. Let's start with headline number 1, 85%. 3 out of 4 of the world's population currently lives in Africa or Asia, right? That is not a forecast going out to the future, that's today. 3 out of 4 of the world's population lives in Africa or Asia. Asia in the year 2030, nearly 6 out of 10 people will live in Asia in the year 2030. Again, we're seeing this demographic domination of Asia, Africa, and the rest. Headline number 2, 129 million. I talked about that earlier. 129 million is the equivalent of Egypt and a half, right? Every year, coming onto the world stage in terms of births. And where are they being born? Again, they're being born in the 85%. Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, but particularly Asia and Africa, 129 million. Headline number 3, 1.5 million per week. What do we mean by that? Every week there are, when you look at the numbers of people moving from a rural environment to an urban environment, 1.5 million new urban dwellers every week, if you count births as well. This is an extraordinary figure. Ladies and gentlemen, we have become an urban planet. And this is new. This is new in human history, the kind of urbanization that we're seeing around the world. And this is our world today, 54% urban, 66% urban by the year 2050. Urbanization has been a leader in preceding social change, political change, and economic change. So keep watching this space of urbanization. 1.5 million per week, moving from a rural environment to an urban environment, or new urban dwellers. Now, cities are also economic engines. You know, someone once said, an emerging markets investor, he was asked what he thinks about Indonesia. And he said, I don't know much about Indonesia, but I sure do like Jakarta. And his point was that it's the cities where the action is. It's in a country like South Korea, the 11th largest economy in the world, Seoul accounts for half of South Korea's GDP. And there was a McKinsey study that showed 600 cities account for 2/3 of global GDP. So watch cities. In Asian cities, today 4 of the top 5 and 6 of the top 10 largest cities are in Asia. Emirates Airlines gets this, right? This is a map of Emirates Airlines' very first 3 routes. Karachi, Mumbai, and Delhi in 1985. We often talk about the Emirates Airlines outside in the West as a Middle East carrier, but it's very much an Asia carrier, right? And if you were to look at the Emirates airline route map today, it would be crisscrossing Asia, crisscrossing India. Dubai has become the India's gateway to the world. There are roughly 1 out of 3 flights that leave India head to the United Arab Emirates, to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Sharjah, but mainly Dubai. And then they go onwards to elsewhere. And you know, Dubai is really, we talked about the 85%. Dubai, the way I see it, is very much at the heart of this 85% story. It is the Hong Kong of South Asia, in some ways the Singapore of the Middle East, and increasingly the Miami of Africa, with all of the African trade and investment that is coming in through Dubai. And which leads some people to say, for the future, it's Shanghai, Mumbai, Dubai, or goodbye. The headline number 4, 5 billion by the year 2030. There's 3 billion people in the global middle class today. We're headed for 5 billion by the year 2030. Most of that new growth will come from the 85%, but particularly from Asia. The Asian middle class and emerging middle classes are major consumers, but emerging middle classes also demand things. They demand services. They demand a greater voice. And this could be a potential for instability going forward in the future. The Asian middle class will account for 2/3 of the global middle class by the year 2030. The Asian middle class. The global middle class is shifting. What we see in the global middle class today is roughly 50% of that global middle class is in the United States and Europe. It is shifting to Asia in terms of the proportion. Asia is the world's largest importing region, imports more than the United States and the European Union combined. Rising Asia is certainly a story that we should be covering closely. And the 5th and the final headline is under 30. The world is young. More than half of the world is under the age of 30, but as you all know, the demographics of the Middle East, North Africa region is even younger than that. But consider this, Sub-Saharan Africa, the youngest region in the world, the median age in Sub-Saharan Africa is 19. The median age in Europe is 42. It gives you a sense of the dramatic differences in age. Under 30, the world is young. And you add to all of this, all of these statistics that I've brought to you, you add the smartphone boom. The smartphone is the rocket fuel that is connecting a lot of this together. We're headed for 6 billion smartphones by the year 2021, which means that we've gone from 0, roughly in 2007, to 6 billion. And the smartphone in your pocket that you may be tweeting on, the smartphone has the same computing capacity that NASA had to send a man to the moon. The same computing capacity. And now it's in your pockets, and it's in pockets in India and Egypt and all over the world. The smartphone. The story of China demand. China is the largest consumer of metals and all sorts of commodities, the largest consumer of pork products, the largest consumer of movies. The China demand engine is a very important story to the global economy. The India rising story is a story that we should be following. Every month, 1 million Indians turn 18, and every second, 3 Indians experience the internet for the first time. They already have the world's largest film industry in India, and the middle class, the population is going to surpass China, and they're headed for the largest middle class as well. And forget Tom Cruise, they have the world's biggest movie star in Shah Rukh Khan, right? The world's biggest movie star. So we're winning the war on poverty, so there's good news in all of this. 25 years ago, 37% of the world lived below the poverty line. Today, it's 9%. So there is some good news. We are healthier than we've ever been around the world. Girls have access to education in ways they have never had around the world. So there's a lot of good news here. So what could go wrong, right? Well, of course, a lot could go wrong. Let's not forget Tyson's Law. You know, the punches will come. The punches will certainly come. You all know this face, of course, Mohammed Bouazizi. You know, there are still too many Mohammed Bouazizis all across the Middle East and North Africa, but not just there. In the developing world, there are too many Mohammed Bouazizis who are eking out a living in the informal economy. You know, one healthcare disaster, one bad encounter with the police, or one bad day away from feeling so desperate that they would light themselves on fire. Jobs. You know, we've heard earlier from some other speakers about how automation is killing manufacturing. So where are we going to find the jobs? Not just for the Mohammed Bouazizis, but for others. Where are we going to find the jobs? So that could certainly go wrong. Trade wars. We've seen the first shots fired in a US-China trade war. And let's hope it doesn't escalate. We don't want the world's two largest economies engaging in any sort of trade war. Let's hope that doesn't escalate. Rising populist nationalism in Europe. If you thought the flow of Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugees into Europe was significant, wait till you see the continuing flow of African migrants into Europe, right? And why are they going to be flowing? Because remember I said the median age is 19. No matter where you stand on the Africa is rising story. And I've been one who stands on the more bullish side. I do see a lot of potential in Africa, but no matter where you stand on that, they're not going to be able to create enough jobs for those young populations, and they will continue to flow to Europe, and that will continue to play a role in European politics going forward. Rising populist nationalism. There's always the possibility of South China Sea tensions. This is where $5 trillion of world trade goes through. The other thing that's very interesting to note, you know, where I live, and I come from the United States, there is this floating anxiety in the air, in the United States and in Europe. I would recommend that you all look at these Pew Research polls, where they ask people, do you think your children will be better off than you? And do you think your country is going in the right direction? And all across, when these polls are done in the United States and when they're done in the United Kingdom and Germany and several European countries, the answers are negative. No, my children are not going to be better off than me. No, my country is not going in the right direction. But then you ask those same questions in many parts of the emerging world that I described, and it's actually more optimistic. It's more optimistic, even though arguably, you know, you have more opportunity in the United States and Europe and many of the countries where they're more optimistic. So there is this floating anxiety, and there is this aspiration in the 85% of the world that we're seeing. And in fact, this is one point I'd like to just make here very quickly. I think the biggest revolution we're seeing in the world today is the revolution of aspiration, where people can meaningfully aspire to a better life in ways that they could not have aspired 20, 30, 40 years ago in places like China and India and elsewhere. But let's not forget this. There is still enormous poverty. There is still people who are literally dying because of the air is polluted. Literally dying. There's 6.5 million people who die every year because of air pollution, according to a World Bank study. So let's not forget that, and let's not forget this. Jobs is going to be our biggest challenge going forward for the next 20 years. And let's not forget inequality in the emerging world. Inequality is not just an issue in advanced economies. And so lastly, I just want to say that, you know, these are these what I call politics-proof trends. And the reason I call them politics-proof trends is because those 129 million children will be born. Those 353,000 children will be born regardless of who sits in the White House, regardless of what President Donald Trump tweets today. Those births are going to happen. The urbanization is going to happen. The middle classes are going to grow, despite, it doesn't matter who sits in the Élysée Palace. It doesn't matter what the headline issues of the day are. And the demographic weight of the world is going to be here. It's going to be in Asia, in the Middle East, Africa. In fact, this term, the Middle East, how many of you know who invented the term the Middle East? It was invented by an American naval strategist writing in the year 1902, who was looking for a way to describe this part of the world. And he wanted to describe a place between the United Kingdom and Europe. And he said, the Middle East, if I may call it such, right? But in many ways, we're in West Asia here in Dubai as well. So these are the politics-proof trends that I see that I think we ought to spend more time covering, and I'm trying to do my part. But I just want to thank you all for being here. I know it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I thank you for hanging out and spending some time with me today. Thank you.